Well, let's sort of come back to attention. We have this morning, several days, and following that delightful time of worship, and really grateful. I want to take a moment just to thank our worship team. Each occasion of worship has been a time of refreshing, and you've just done a wonderful job. We're truly grateful, so thank you. And we'll be praying for Lane as well. I am really delighted to stand in here to welcome and thank in advance Bishop Scott Jones and President Cam West for not only their leadership, but their willingness to engage us in a conversation this morning. And I know we've already received them, but will you join me in expressing appreciation that I have? We have a couple of questions that we'd like each of you to respond to, and then we'll open it up for questions from the floor as well. And this is a moment, I don't have the program with me. Steve, you probably do, because you have your folder right there. What is the title of this session? Just
the title is something like State of the Church, State of the Academy, but I'll tell you, a conversation on the state of the church and the state of the academy. Well done. I may have read this a couple times.
Well, and we appreciate you putting this program together. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and read the questions from my phone that we sort of prepared in advance. And both of you have already, we discussed these last night. But just to help frame our conversation together and to help you think about what additional questions, time permitting, you'd like to ask. So here we go. First question is, why are institutions of the church important, and how do you prevent institutional drift? Right? The second question is, what practical steps can be taken to safeguard the relationship of an educational institution with the church? All right, we talked about that a little last night. Third, how might an educational institution function as both a servant of a servant to and a critic of the church? Okay, servant and critic. And then questions from the floor. I'd also like to invite all of us to think about and engage the questions about the location where we are and the experience we had yesterday of visiting the recent Justice Museum and Monument, and how that might impact our responses to these questions. Is that enough?
We'll just be on the tip.
Okay, so we begin with the question of why are institutions of the church important, and how do you work to prevent institutional drift?
I will. In part because I want to tell you of a book that has given me new ways of framing this. Kevin Rowe is at Duke and wrote a book called Christianity's Surprise. It's rather small. He said, he wanted to do one of these huge scholarly things on this topic, but it never got around to it. So he published just 100 pages. He said Christianity surprised the Roman Empire by three things. First, they had a story of everything. And in a world that was divided in so many ways, Christianity had a unifying narrative that there was, in fact, a God of everything and that Jesus was God. Secondly, he said that they had a story of what it means to be human. that in fact the incarnation of Christ redefined humanity, and for the first time, all people were seen as valuable and worthwhile because of this story of everything. But the third thing is where I really wanted to get to with you all today. He said, Christians created institutions, priesthood, ministry, episcopacy, and then he went on to talk about the creation of educational institutions. Oh, he also said, which was a claim I wasn't quite familiar with, Christians were created the very first orphanages anywhere in the world. They created the very first hospitals anywhere in the world. Those are the kinds of institutions that were created. But also that the Christians knew that in order to accomplish their purpose, they had to create a parallel educational system that would provide the kind of engagement with the best of the ancient world's educational systems. And so Origen and others created schools that were going to form Christians with the mind. Which then leads me to my second reading recommendation for you. Ken asked me last night if I had read the white paper that was sent out in the pre-meeting material for this, and the answer was no. I got down to what I thought I needed to get here, and then quit reading all the other things that Carrie sent to me. So I read it this morning. It was a white paper delivered to, I think, the Western North Carolina Annual Conference about the role of church-related or Christian colleges and universities, and what role they play in the ethos of higher education in America today. I highly commend that to you. But part of what he said was, quoting Philippians 2, have this mind in you which was in Christ Jesus, that a Christian formation of the mind is an important task, and that having an institution to embody that is an important step. And so Methodists in the settling of America created these institutions knowing that the formation of the Christian mind was a holistic task that had to be taken on. And these institutions of colleges, universities, had a calling to help create a certain kind of country, a certain kind of state, but also a certain kind of church. So that's the framing for this from my point of view is, some of you are younger than me. I think the baby boomer generation developed an anti-institutional mantra that said institutions are bad, they're corrupt. I think what we have got to do is rethink what is an institution. That my generation tended to contrast institution and movement. Well, movement is differentiated because it has purpose. And so I want to be a part of a movemental institution, an institution that has longevity, that takes care of its people, but is driven by a purpose that's clear and goes all the way through that. Some of the leadership books I've read, particularly Patrick Lencioni's book, The Advantage, talks about how organizational health is crucial and it depends upon clarity of purpose. I mentioned last night my wife has just sold her construction company to our daughter. One of the things that made Mary Lou successful was she knows that she and her team build bridges and culverts. If you ask them to do asphalt, she says, no, that's not us. Her father ventured into some things, and when Mary Lou got control, she shut them down. We do bridges and culverts. Okay, and they're good at it, and they make money at it, and they provide employment for people. I think the crucial question for most of our institutions is the question of institutional drift. And so, Cam, of all of the college presidents for United Methodist Colleges, I want to pay tribute to you because I think Huntingdon is maybe in the top 4 or 5 of United Methodist institutions that have clarified their purpose and haven't drifted. How'd you do it?
Well, I've got a great faculty here. I'll attribute a lot of it to that. Putting together a faculty. Thank you before I get to that question. And I hope the faculty who are here today, thank you, Paul, will join me in the discussion and just interrupt me where necessary or correct me. Because the faculty, enshrining a good religion faculty that's committed to the church, it is crucial to preventing institutional drift. Not just for religion majors, but to enshrine an educational philosophy across the curriculum and within the institution as a whole. Thank you for mentioning the white paper. It was an expansion of remarks I made to the National Association of Colleges and Universities of the United Methodist Church in 2008. Bishop Newpastor, who chaired the search committee that brought me to Huntington as president when he was the bishop here, then went on to Western North Carolina, invited me to preach in my home conference, which was probably the signal honor of my entire ministry, to be able to preach in Stewart Auditorium at Lake Junaluska in the opening worship service, and then to give this address the next day. But I did the text for the white paper was Philippians 2, and I just want to lift up a couple of things since the bishop mentioned this. I made a statement that my view of the life of the mind, which is not my view, I think it's Paul's view, is what shapes what I believe our church's philosophy and practice of the ministry of higher education should be. I think that's the first thing a college president has to articulate and enshrine in his or her institution, mainly through the faculty, but also you obviously have to have the support of the Board of Trustees and at least a senior administration that's going to drive that through, is that it is a ministry. It is a ministry. It is an incarnate ministry. Paul knows, Paul's father was chair of the Board of Trustees at Pfeiffer when I was growing up on that campus. My dad was the chief academic officer, and later, after a period of 12 years where he had left and gone to be chancellor of higher education in 2 states, North Carolina and Illinois, he came back to be president because I remember Terry Sanders saying, why are you going back to a small school after having been chancellor of higher education in 2 states? And he said, well, first of all, I've always wanted, like your brother, to be a college president, which I always wanted to be too. And secondly, it's my calling. I've devoted my life to the church. And I grew up on a college campus where the philosophy was that the college was the ministry of the church. That's been in my DNA my whole life. And that's what I've tried to help Huntington recover. And I believe we've done it. And to a large degree, these men and women in front of me are responsible for that. But I also said, to expand on that a little, that Paul was not talking about a mind which engages only in theoretical, disinterested speculation, cut off from everyday living realities. For Paul, the mind of Christ, which we are to have as a church in all our dimensions, is a mind which reflects on how to live and which creates a way of living. In fact, the mind of Christ is a way of living. And so, Scott, what I did, first of all, when I came to Huntington 20 years ago, and I could not have done this without the support of the Board of Trustees and my bishop, Larry Goodpaster. And I've been fortunate in Larry and Paul Leland, with whom I was a minister in North Carolina for many years, and now David Grace. I've been blessed to have bishops who have been very active trustees. They don't just show up and eat lunch and leave. They are really engaged. In fact, I put the bishop from the beginning on my assessment committee, which meets with me annually, because I'm under appointment. And I wanted the trustees to understand that it was crucial for the bishop to be on that assessment committee, to articulate to help me articulate the idea that the presidency, at least while I'm holding it, is an appointed office in the college. And as I remind them often, if the bishop wanted me to, he could lift me up and send me to East Buckwalk any day he or she wants to. I mean, that's just who I am, and I wanted the college to understand that from the beginning. Several of our religion faculty are under appointment, either in this annual conference or another annual conference, and that's by design. I wanted, we haven't always had all United Methodist or Methodist on our religion faculty, we do now, but I wanted to build a faculty that saw themselves as servants of the church and serve the ministry. The faculty has been crucial. Enshrining a board of trustees that's committed to the church is crucial. But the tone of my presidency started really in the airport interview. When you interview for a college presidency, there's several stages. Before you go to campus for the final interviews, you get flown into an airport, and you're supposed not to see who the other candidates are, but we can tell. We're lurking in the lobby, waiting. The first question that the committee asked me came from Lawson Bryan, who later became my pastor at First Montgomery and then Bishop of South Georgia. He was chair of the Trustee Church Relations Committee. And he said, let me just start off and ask, how can the church serve the college? And I said, well, Dr. Bryan, he was the pastor then at First Church Dothan, let me turn it around and ask the question this way, with respect, obviously. The question should be, how can the college serve the church? For the college is the church, not in toto, but unless we see ourselves as the church, then your stated goal, which was the search committee's stated goal of reclaiming that relationship, we're not going to go anywhere. We have to see the college as an institution, an incarnate part of the church, as much as a local congregation or the United Methodist Women or the youth group or the mission committee or whatever. And so that's kind of the way we started. I just felt like we needed to drive a stake in the ground from the beginning, and we've held to it. The first year it was very difficult to do that. We had one religion faculty member, one full-time religion faculty member. And although we've had some outstanding clergy come through before I got here, obviously, we had a religion major that was very different then. I set out at the very beginning to design a religion major that, for better or worse, was designed on the seminary education I got at Yale, which was a fourfold: biblical studies, historical studies, theological and ethical studies, and praxis. And that became the basis of our religion major. The other thing we've done is we, very early on, even before the Lilly Endowment began its campaign with the Council of Independent Colleges to establish a network for vocation and undergraduate education, we started talking very explicitly, beginning with my very first address at opening convocation, to talk about the importance of helping young men and women discern what I have referred to often as the most important existential question in human life. What am I being called to do? What am I being called to do with my life? And that's what Lilly has really run with and made an industry of in the last 15 years. And that was a new idea to most of our faculty at the time. I can remember a faculty member saying, well, what does teaching Milton have to do with calling? I said, actually, I think that's kind of what Milton was doing. So we had to have a lot of those hard conversations in the beginning. I'll give Tom Perrin, our chief academic officer, when he was on the English faculty, the credit for kind of taking this idea and championing it with the rest of the faculty. And it was crucial when Tom stepped forward and began to lead that effort. But we have made that a part of our curriculum, and the engagement with the Equal Justice Initiative is a part of that. And I think maybe this would be a good point, if you're okay, for Stephen, Diana, Sarah, to jump in and talk about how we engage the EJI call. Sarah's director of our call program. Sarah?
That's true. We have, the call program has morphed several times. Hi, everybody. Morphed several times.
Can you walk up here?
Yeah, please.
I'm definitely not doing that. So the call program has morphed several times since it's begun under President West's leadership. It's been something that was engaged in the first year for freshmen. It's been something that was engaged as a sort of capstone to Gen Ed. Right now it's divided into two courses, a two-course sequence, one that's taken in the sophomore year, which is where we tend to lose most students who don't have a clear idea of why they're in college at all, right? They need to, if they're not in the soccer team and they're not getting the playtime they thought they would at a Division III school, they sort of lose their sense of purpose. Why college? Why do this thing that I might be in the first person in my family to do? So that's where we lose a lot of students to this sort of fuzzy sense of their purpose in life. So we moved the call class to a sophomore level class that incorporates a retreat day with a field trip like we took to EJI in order to help students understand that whatever their calling is. Dr. Perrin's tagline that I've just embraced with all my heart is, if it's not ethical, it's not your calling. You cannot be called to do work that is destructive and unjust. So, we engage with questions of justice, we engage with questions of a society that oriented itself around injustice for too long, and we invite students to reflect on how their calling in life might orient itself around remedying past injustices, certainly building more justice, and serving the community, serving the church, serving God's children in ways that humans too often fail to do. Dr. Stephen Sowers has taught a previous iteration of call. Dr. Abernathy is teaching this coming semester, is teaching in that program. I don't think anyone else that's here has done so. Lane did. That's right. Professor Davis has taught in it as well.
And Diana, I'm sorry, Bria's not here today. But Bria and Diana are teaching courses around themes of race and justice. Diana, would you come up and talk about your courses? Because again, I was struck last night by something Joy said. Well, it was, what are we doing as higher education institutions to really, as seminaries or as colleges, to kind of address these questions your panel was dealing with last night? And I was sitting there thinking, well, certainly from 1975 to 1978 at YDS, at Yale, the hot issue then was women's ordination. That just shows you, how the world has changed. But there were no real questions around race and justice. When I did my THM work at Duke in 83, 84, again, no real engagement. But I think, we're trying to do that here. And so I thought it would be helpful if Diana could talk about her course.
Yeah, great. I really enjoyed being a part of the Race and Justice Initiative that you started in 2020.
Yep.
And so there have been several parts of that, and one of them has been an interdisciplinary minor in African American Studies. And so we in the religion department designed 2 courses to serve the college in that way. I wish Bria was here. I think the main, she and Stephen designed the 200 level course that mostly focuses around Esau McCaulley's Reading While Black and Howard Thurman's Jesus the Disinherited, is that right? Okay, great. I don't want to get it wrong from my chair. And then I designed a 300-level course specifically about Old Testament interpretation and race. And I wanted to take a long view of history. One of the things I thought about was we're a small college, and there are very few of us who have PhDs with expertise in the ancient world. I think Jason Borders, our New Testament faculty, and I are the only one. Stephen's got beat by 1,000 years, or Stephen's 1,000 years later with Aquinas. But I think everybody else does the modern world, which is great. Obviously, there's a lot to say there. But I was like, what can I contribute that's taking a much longer view of history than anybody else, aside from Dr. Borders, can on the faculty? And so I structured the course around that we went back in time and looked at what does identity and difference look like in the ancient world before the invention of the modern concept of race. I appreciated Dr. Daniel's comments about, he touched on this the other day. And then the invention of the modern category of race, it connected to European colonialism. And so we looked at sort of identity in ancient Israel, what was going on in colonialism, and how the invention of the modern concept of race came in there, and the role of biblical interpretation there. It was interesting for me, I was like, I know biblical interpretation has been part of that. And as I dug more into the history for preparing for this course, I realized that really biblical interpretation and scientific racism are probably the main articulations of when the idea of race is articulated. Those are the main intellectual strategies used. And so I was like, this is really timely. And it was great. I had several science majors in the class, and they don't teach the history of their field in the same way. And I remember one of them was just like reading in one of our intro chapters about the phrenology and skull measurements, and just was shocked that this was science. And so it was really great to take this long view of history. And so the first half of the course was sort of looking further back in time, both in the ancient world and sort of European colonialism, as then sort of moving into the last third of the course was looking at African Americans as creative interpreters of the Old Testament through American history. And obviously, with a third of the semester, we had to dip in, but we hit Phyllis Wheatley and the spirituals and Martin Luther King's sermons and a couple weeks on womanist theology and biblical interpretation, and then got to the present. And I told the students at the beginning of the class, I really hope this will be a course that will help you more understand how we got to today than how to go forward. Like, that's what you'll learn in the other classes. But for me, I want you to look at this history. And one of the students was like, this was really great. Like, we've talked about race, but I never thought about where it came from. How did we get here? And so that was a really great experience to be. I think there are things I would do different as anytime I first teach a class, but it was really affirming to see that this was, like, taking the long view of history was something that was really helpful for students, and it was kind of something different. And so, yeah, that's what I did. Yeah. Thanks.
We started the Race and Justice Initiative before the murder of George Floyd, but obviously the murder of George Floyd accelerated the energy for that. And one of the things I learned as an old white guy liberal, listening to our young African American alumni particularly, was that they felt that in their Huntington experience there had not been enough people who looked like them and came from their background in the classroom as faculty. So we have addressed that issue pretty aggressively, and Dr. Pear and I issued he was fully supportive of this and helped me really come to how we were going to do this. But I sent out a public memo to the faculty that I had in consultation with Dr.